Well, today I'm so excited. I have our representative, Congressman Joe Courtney, today. He is our second Congressional District congressman, so serving us and has been since 2006. We have a lot to talk about. I want to talk about education, COVID if we have a chance, the environment, economic, and maybe you'll just have to come back, Joe. I don't know.
Happy to.
Happy to come back,
Yeah.
but so happy to have you here today, and glad to have you, and thank you for the trip down to be here with us today. But you said you were in Groton, so you didn't have to come too far to
No.
Waterford.
So, but as you know, if you have a map of the second district, it's 40% of the state's geography.
It's huge.
And it goes from the Long Island Sound up to the Mass border. I live up in Vernon, which is the fourth largest town in the district,
And you've lived there for a long time.
I have. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And but yeah, so yeah, made the trip down this morning. Met with the city of Groton Mayor Keith Hendrick and his public works staff because. Groton being, a coastal community like East Lyme, we're seeing the impact of climate change in
Yes.
terms of sea level rise. And, the resiliency along the coastline is going to be really challenged by that. There are some seawalls in Groton which were built in the 1800s.
Oh, wow.
Who are, poster child for, this issue, and also, the need for the infrastructure definition of infrastructure to really be enlarged from roads and bridges, which is clearly a big piece of the bill that the president signed in November.
We can't ignore it. We have
No.
to pay.
No, that's a big piece, but we also have to recognize that the resiliency is now just a fact of life.
It's vulnerable, absolutely.
So we had a great meeting. We kind of was freezing out there, but I mean, it like I said, it was a poster child for really something that is very much at risk in terms of giving away. So and there's an engineered plan to deal with it, and now it's a question of trying to sort of plug in whether it's rescue plan money or whether it's the bipartisan infrastructure bill money, or if we get the Build Back Better legislation through, which actually has a very large section on climate change, including coastal resiliency. So anyway, we were in the neighborhood, and this worked out perfectly.
Oh,
to come
great.
visit.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for making the trip.
Yeah.
So good to see you again. I saw you a couple of years
Yes.
ago with COVID. I guess we haven't really been out and about too much. So I know education is part of your wheelhouse. It's something that I've cared about, and my mother was a teacher. I grew up in a family where third generation looking at education. So tell me what you're thinking about education and what's going on. You said there's going to be some money appropriated possibly for the town where I live. I'm on the Board of Ed, so that's
Yes.
really exciting news.
Well, thank you for that service. I sit on the House Education and Labor Committee. Again, I'm Armed Services as well, as many of your listeners know. But I chose the Education Committee as soon as I went to Congress, because when you look at the state of Connecticut, in my opinion, the key to our future prosperity is really what's between the ears. I mean,
Absolutely.
we don't grow large commodity crops. Now with offshore wind, we actually may start seeing some power generation, sort of emanating from here, but we certainly don't drill for, coal or oil or anything like that. And so, the key to so many of our sectors of the Connecticut economy is a really well-trained, well-educated population. And again, thank you for really, being right at the front lines in terms of making sure that our kids are going to really be ready for the 21st century economy.
Well, it's all about the academics and the co-curriculars that go with that, and then developing the student as a 21st century learner and
Right.
thinking about their citizenship and what they need to do when they do graduate.
No, it's the key to success.
Mm-hmm.
When the COVID hit, as you know, one of the hardest hit sort of parts of our country really was school-age kids and actually kids in higher education who suddenly had this massive disruption. And the COVID bills that sort of went out in succession, starting with the CARES Act and the follow-on bills, and the last big one was the rescue plan, which President Biden signed in March. One of the biggest priorities that our committee pushed was to really make sure that our schools had the resources to stay open safely and to really address the learning loss and challenges that COVID has really done to, I think in some instances really result in kids going backwards in terms of their proficiencies. And
it definitely happened, and we're seeing a lot of that. And then the referrals are up as far as special education. And as somebody who was a special education interventionist, I always question, is it special ed or is it, what is it? Because it's not really something that's organic. It's something that happened because of the environment and because of natural occurrences.
So, and as you know, I mean, really before COVID, we were really starting to see a pretty striking and almost alarming increase in kids with behavioral health problems.
Yes.
And COVID, I think it's pretty clear, just really turbocharged that in terms of the volume that's there. So the rescue plan, had within its initial funding levels, direct aid to school districts. Again, Title I, which is the sort of, workhorse of federal funding for education, was the formula that was used to, transmit funds quickly so that, as I said, school districts could really cope with reopening and getting in-person learning back in place. So in a city or town like East Lyme, it was $1.7 million that was distributed. Waterford, I believe was, let me make sure I got the right program here. So Waterford was 2.3 million. New London was very significant in terms of their funding. It was $16 million dollars that was there. So again, that's really, just to sort of deal with basic issues of staffing, the salaries, that go with that. Some of the remediation programs, particularly summer learning programs, et cetera. But special ed, was stressed, as you would know better than anyone, because of the challenges that kids were feeling emotionally.
Of course.
And some of that money was going into, that sort of bucket. We also passed a separate funding for special ed, which, as you and I were just talking off camera, the State Department of Education finally has started to distribute those funds. So East Lyme, again, got about $116,000 additional money for special education, which, compared to the ESSER money, is a smaller amount, but, every penny is helpful in terms
Absolutely.
of, and as you know, as long as I've been in Congress, the underfunding of special education, which is a federal mandate, IDEA, has been the biggest battle cry of local communities who, if you've got a child with a severe, issue that falls within IDEA's scope, I mean, the cost that can happen, in terms of, making sure that they get a learning plan, et cetera, can really capsize a education budget, just in the case of really sometimes just a small number of pupils. So,
well, we have some kids in East Lyme who have some very significant needs, and they do require a lot of careful intervention and thoughtful intervention, and they're not easy. I've worked with some of them. They're delightful. I love them, of course, but
they're lucky
about,
to have you.
It's about doing the right thing at the right time and knowing how to intervene. And that's another thing. Staffing is so difficult right now.
Right. So, but again, just to finish the thought on IDEA, because really, the problem has been it's just been flat funded, and the costs in terms of dealing with some of these cases has continued to grow, and the towns have had to absorb a lot of that cost, which again, given the fact that it's a federal requirement, again, has been a real complaint. One thing to finish the thought is just that we also have to finish passing the fiscal year 2022 budget, which again, right now we're operating on a continuing resolution to keep the government open, which is last year's spending levels. If you look at the budget that the president sent over earlier this year for education, again, being on the education committee, it is by far the best budget I've seen in my 15 years.
Nice.
There was a 20% increase for IDEA funding. And again, this is separate from what we just discussed, which was the emergency money that's there. And Congresswoman DeLauro, who is the chair of the Appropriations Committee now, which is the first time in history for Connecticut, this is something that she is, passionate about in terms of making sure that we get the help to these communities so that again these kids get the help.
They need the help.
But it doesn't suffocate the town's property tax base, you know, which has really always been the tension that special ed has created over the years. I mean, to the extent that the feds step up more and fund this mandate, the pressure is less in terms of, you know, your ability to, you know, run a good program.
Exactly. I totally understand what you're saying. Yeah, it's just vital. It's vital to the future. And the thing that's so interesting about the kids who are sometimes identified is sometimes they can bring the best gifts and the best talent, and if you give them the proper intervention, then they can really soar and do great things. Which reminds me of STEM. Is there special planning or programming or?
So it's not formulaic, you know, STEM. You know, there are definitely you know, some programs that the state can apply for in the form of competitive grants, et cetera. But you know, one thing that, you know, we're certainly seeing is that you know, there's starting to be some really interesting overlap with education federal dollars and labor department federal dollars.
Interesting.
Because you know, in a region like this where you know, STEM is so critical to, you know, whether it's, you know, over at the shipyard with the engineer and design work, or Pfizer, or, you know, you name it, you know, STEM is just, you know,
it
integral.
Makes sense.
Right.
It just makes sense.
So the Workforce Board in Eastern Connecticut, which is the recipient of Labor Department funding, you know, usually that's done for programs for job training for, you know, people who are either out of school or, you know, job center referrals, you know, who are in the workforce. They are now starting to reach down into high schools.
That's lovely.
And even junior high schools, and it's all about STEM.
Well, and some of the work that we're doing is called ELOs, Educational Learning Opportunities for Kids who are in a Coastal Connection program that we have in East Lyme. So it's helping them have field experiences and getting them out there so they understand whatever it is, if it's the environment or culinary or the mechanics of different things, or you know, there's just so many learning opportunities. And plus, just showing up on time for work, kind of being a pleasant coworker, supporting the boss, understanding, you know, intuitively what you need to do next, rather than sitting with your hands in your pocket, kind of thing. And
so I know the Waterford High School is definitely now connected with the Workforce Board, and they are running programs there in terms of again, trying to get kids, you know, job ready, very connected to the workforce needs in the region, which is what that's where the Workforce Boards, that's their real, you know, secret sauce.
Exactly.
Is that it's localized. It's not sort of, we don't tell them how to design their curriculum for training programs. You know, they're doing it in terms of what's needed in the area.
Well, people know, I think, the right thing to do. I think it's just a matter of kind of developing the program, getting the connections established. And of course, then there's COVID. And COVID has just, like we said previously, has just kind of put things on the back burner where we want to move forward. But
yeah. And so, I mean, again, and this is another case where I think the rescue plan back in March, which was, you know, somewhat controversial, and there were people who really felt, you know, it was unnecessary because, you know, COVID was already sort of, you know, we had vaccines, so why are we, you know, continuing to give states, you know, the resources to do things like, you know, testing and masking and, you know, dealing with this issue. Well, I would say, you know, we're here in early January, you know, when there's probably the biggest spike ever in terms of infections, and it's a darn good thing.
We had 62 students that were reported in East Lyme with having the Omicron component of the virus.
So all these test kits, which the governor is, you know, now trying to get out to communities, as well as the kits that President Biden is going to be making available to people in the next couple of weeks, all of that was funded by the rescue plan, the federal government. And, you know, Ned Lamont, to his credit, you know, did kind of tip his hat to the fact that, you know, the project that they're working on with the Connecticut National Guard and others to get these test kits out to local communities, I mean, it would not exist if we had not passed the rescue plan.
Well, I'm glad that we did, and that was something that you supported, I'm sure.
Yeah, big time. And as I said, we marked up the education piece in our committee, and myself and Johanna Hayes, who's my colleague from the western part of the state, former National Teacher of the Year, great person and you know, another passionate advocate for education, which it really, as I said, is not just a feel-good issue. This is about Connecticut.
Well,
it
you
really
get it
is.
when you
Yes.
understand that it's
Yeah.
our future.
Right.
And I'm a strong proponent of helping the parents be better educators and seeing their role as not just the parent, but also the educator. And I always felt like we should do more of that. And that was one of the things that I felt a little bit disappointed with, I guess, perhaps, is that we didn't re-look at how we do some of our educational practices. And
So,
I thought,
well, you know, what was interesting is, and I'm glad you brought that point up, because again, the rescue plan money really was designed to be very flexible for school districts in terms of how they spent it. In Salem, right next
Yep.
door, they actually created what was called a parent academy.
oh, see, that's
Which
exactly
is-
the idea
yeah.
that I think was like the perfect thing to do.
Yeah, and I've never talked to the superintendent there, but I've read about, you know, what they did, because they realized with the virtual learning, suddenly parents were starting to sort of be involved in what was going on in the you know, the virtual classroom, and I think the school district made just a brilliant decision to really kind of, you know, strengthen that with a program for parents to sort of engage with teachers about curriculum and all
Exactly.
those issues, which, you know, I mean, obviously that's become now a real political football in terms of curriculum, you know, with critical race theory and all that, and you know, Congress does not set curriculum.
No.
This is it's organic, it's local, and you know, critical race theory obviously has nothing to do with K through 12 education
No.
anywhere in the country. But engaging with parents is, of course, we need to do that. You know, they should not be excluded. They should be part of that.
Absolutely. Well, parents always want to do the right thing, is my opinion, 99.9%. Every once in a while, you'll have an outlier who doesn't really have that vested interest. But you met my granddaughter. My daughter became a mother, and so then hence I became a grandmother. But she was like, Mom, how did you know how to do these things? I was like, honey, this was my wheelhouse. This is what I did for 36 years kind of thing. And it's just so important for me to be able to show her. I mean, she's intuitive and does a really good job, but that same lesson that, you know, the Parent Academy, that same kind of thing, you learn through the community and that investment that we have for our children. So it's just so huge.
Yeah.
So COVID Health, American Rescue, we talked about that, the ESSER grant. Anything more on COVID?
Well, you know, as I said, the other piece of the rescue plan, which again was a COVID bill, you know, we really, I think, addressed access to health care in terms of the Affordable Care Act. Again, one of the, you know, we've been through this battle since 2010, you know, with it, and you know, the repeal effort collapsed under the Trump administration. But there's no question that there were affordability problems for people who were enrolling in, I mean, really expensive deductibles and premiums. And if you look at what the rescue plan did, is it aggressively, you know, brought down those premium costs and deductible costs, you know, really in a very impressive way. And so, because, you know, having a medical home with insurance coverage is key to obviously making sure that, you know,
The doctors communicate, the therapists all work together.
That, you know, when you're dealing with a COVID infection or, you know, hospitalization or whatever, you know, you're not worried about, you know, who's going to pay for this. So,
Exactly.
And you know, with the Build Back Better bill, which is still pending, as you know, in the Senate, I mean, that would actually make those changes to the Affordable Care Act permanent, and which Senator Manchin said he actually doesn't have a problem with that. So that's one area that hopefully will emerge at some point.
Well, that's really interesting.
Yep.
Well, and I thought telehealth was something that kind of grew out of COVID, which I think was one of the if there was a good outcome from that
Totally.
People, yeah, because I know therapists were saying that they could actually FaceTime with their client and they could actually see, like, if their eyes welled up or like the little micro expressions that people have on their faces and what that all meant and how they could respond.
Interesting little fact, kind of a sad one, which is that before COVID, the state of Connecticut actually was probably the only state in the country that did not reimburse for telehealth through its state Medicaid program, which, you know, for people in the behavioral health, you know, sector, I mean, this was a huge problem because, as you know, I mean, telemedicine really actually
it works.
It really works, and in Eastern Connecticut, where the tyranny of distance is the strongest,
It's
we're
huge,
the most sort of spread out part of the state. You know, and we were sort of, locking horns with the State Department of Social Services to say, come on, because there were opportunities to get free equipment pre-COVID.
Right.
Well, COVID changed all that. I mean, the
For
state.
a good thing, right?
That's right. The state just said, yep, open it up, and
Good.
not just for behavioral health, for all forms of medical treatment. And I think it's here to stay.
That's good. And I know you do a lot with veterans, and I work a lot with a veteran that we have in East Lyme and some of the veteran community, and that is really important too. And our veterans sometimes don't have rides, they don't have transportation, they have to go great distances to attend the VA hospital.
Well, the VA was ahead of the curve with telemedicine. They really were.
I'm sure.
But good news locally here is that the New London Health Clinic just cut the ribbon in terms of its new 15,000 square foot property or space in New London.
Nice.
Which, again, the prior facility was 5,000. So, I mean, they really have a lot more room to do direct care for phlebotomy and other things which they did not have in the old space. And it's a gorgeous building that's in New London.
Where is that? I have to go check it out.
So it's in the
Shaw's
I knew you were
Cove?
Shaw. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
So they moved from the Shaw's Cove space they were in into a much bigger Shaw's Cove space, and it's gorgeous. The staff is over the moon.
Nice.
In terms, that's such a morale boost. You know what I mean? To have good space.
Absolutely.
And they do great work.
Good. That's great. Well, I'm glad to hear that. And then the next thing, economic development. I think we think of Connecticut and we think of Hartford, and we think of the Gold Coast, down Fairfield. There's a lot of money down there, a lot of development there. But then the eastern, our district, the 2nd Congressional District, it's a little shy, right? And you said the educational component of that's really important. So what can you tell me about economics and developing?
So, one development that I think is very much connected to climate change and the 21st century economy is the fact that, finally the Army Corps issued a permit to allow the wind turbine assembly activity to go forward at the State Pier in New London. So if you drive by that part of New London, you'll see the construction cranes that are all just sort of waiting. The permit limited their ability to do fill of the space between the two docks where the pier is just for environmental reasons. But that is going to be a hub of activity for offshore wind, which is going to happen. The Biden administration, basically that was one of the big changes that took place was that they started to finally issue permits for construction of the offshore wind towers that are out there, and the assembly of those towers is actually going to happen in New London. So there's an initial tranche of jobs, for just the construction of this new modernized pier, and then once the wind turbine assembly work takes place, which is going to be around for a good decade or more. That obviously is another workforce that's going to be part of our future, and there's a good sort of ripple effect in terms of ancillary services that will go with that. Across the river, you'll see more cranes with obviously electric boat in terms of the new construction facility there for the Columbia program, which is that's the Navy's #1 priority. They're at about 18,000 right now in terms of the workforce, 12,000 in Connecticut and about 6,000 in Quonset Point, Rhode Island. That's going to go easily into the low 20s to mid 20,000 workforce that's there. A lot of people retiring who are there. It's a baby boomer kind of shift that's happening there. So you really have to hire more than just that new delta. To get to that higher number, you're going to have to hire a lot more. And and those are good jobs, that obviously have been part of this region. When I first got elected, the workforce was about 7,000. So
you're seeing good growth then.
No, definitely. Tourism. Again, I think is still a very strong sector in this area in this region. We as we really sort of look at the infrastructure bill in terms of the water quality investments that are going to be there, I think that bodes well for sort of the shellfish and
that whole industry
that's there. And and again, I actually am very bullish, in terms of Eastern Connecticut. As you move further north towards where I live, obviously you've got the flagship university.
Yes.
And we've had, I think, a really change of culture there in terms of, making it much more of a research institution, which is bringing in a lot more funding, and there's a lot of spin-offs that comes with, a research university, as you know. And so, and lastly, the Quiet Corner also has its own tourism sort of strength. That I think, I think we're going to see, more, activity and investment. I mean, it's gorgeous up there. It's really, a lot of history.
Oh, absolutely.
That's up there as well. And so anyway, as I said, I'm bullish.
So you're very optimistic too, which
Yes.
I think we need somebody with optimism and determination
Right.
to be in that position.
No, the state's in a much stronger fiscal position too, which frankly has been a bit of a turnoff for companies coming into the state of Connecticut. That's a real strength. By the way, the other part that's in the infrastructure bill is broadband investment in electric vehicle chargers.
Nice.
So, I was at the Rotary Club yesterday in Norwich just saying, really, if you step back and imagine what it's going to be 5 years from now, when we are electrifying our transportation and, the offshore wind, really it's just going to be a different look in a good way. That's really, helping deal with issues of climate change and, resiliency and, just a more efficient transportation system.
Well, that's what we need. We need efficiency, and we need economic development that makes sense, and preserving our environment. All of that makes a lot of good sense. Well, we only have a couple minutes left. What are your plans for the future? How can we support you? What do we look forward to knowing or seeing moving forward?
Yeah. So one of my concerns right now is just that during COVID, under both the Trump administration and now the Biden administration, there was a recognition that the disruption to the economy kind of screamed out that the student loan borrowers out there, which are in the millions, should really get sort of a timeout. And so there's been student loan forbearance, where people have gotten sort of a respite,
a
from
pause,
their monthly payment. And you may have seen just really a couple days ago, President Biden extended that forbearance out to May 1st, which I supported that decision. But frankly, there's a day of reckoning in terms of how do we address this huge overhang. It's $1 trillion plus, and there's a group that is pushing hard for just canceling student loan debt across the board. President Biden, when he campaigned, said he would support cancellation of up to $10,000, but he really felt that above that, you're kind of creating other sort of inequities and disincentives in the system that's there, and we'll see, how that sort of shakes out. But the one thing that really should be a no-brainer is that we should allow people to refinance the interest rates that they have on these legacy student loans.
Sure, absolutely.
So that requires an act of Congress.
Oh, okay.
To do that, because the government holds most of the debt through the Stafford Student Loan Program, and right now, there's people. If this thing snaps back in May, they're going to snap back 6%, 7%, 8% interest, which is insane, given the fact that the benchmark for the Federal Reserve right now is pretty much zero.
Well, we'll look forward to having that happen.
That's one that I'm determined, to really be part of our committee, and hopefully, in a bipartisan way to get. It's just we refinance homes, credit card debt, auto loans. Why is student loan debt sort of locked in place?
Sounds like we'll do it. Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you.